welcome back to The Good Life. This is a podcast from Christ Fellowship Church in Mansfield, Texas. This is an extension of our preaching and teaching ministry. Our goal each week is that we remember what it means to think clearly, to live faithfully, and to follow Jesus in the middle of real life, all the while encouraging one another towards multiplying impact for Christ's kingdom. And so, welcome back. I am Ryan Rives. I'm here with our senior pastor, Spencer Plumlee. Spencer, good to be with you.
Good to see you, man.
How
Good
are
to be
you?
back. I'm
Doing
okay.
well?
How about you?
Doing great, doing great.
Good.
This week's episode is the QR code.
Indeed.
QR code. So before we get into questions and what that means, I want to take a second to explain for the listener, if you're unfamiliar with our gathering over the last several months at Christ Fellowship, something we do that I think is one of the most important things that we do right now in a lot of ways. Every week during the sermon, Spencer will start the sermon and tell us, hey, QR code's on the screen.
When I remember to do it.
When you remember. Yeah.
First service, people like, he doesn't always remember. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But man, just telling people, hey, pull out your phone, type in a question and submit this here. It is anonymous. I get the question all the time. When I submit this question, is it anonymous? Or why didn't you get to my question? I tell people, I didn't know it was your question. And so while you're preaching, me or somebody else is fielding these questions, and we kind of pare some down, get them to you. And each week at the end of the sermon, we have a time of response, and then following that, you get a shot at 5 minutes or so to answer a question or two that come in during the sermon. And so these go to you. He will take one or two of them at the end of every service. And so what we're doing today is taking several questions that have come in either over and over again or ones you haven't been able to get to. They've been sitting in the queue for some time.
Yes, yes.
And
I've
so
been anxiously waiting for this moment, and
That's
now it's
right.
here.
So I've been compiling some of these over the last few weeks into a Google Doc, and today we're going to take some of those on. So first, I want to ask you, I already said this. It matters a lot to me. I think it's super important. But why did we start doing this? Why is this so important to you as a preacher? And what has this meant for our church the last few months?
In general, I'm always trying to get better.
Yeah.
I do not think I've arrived as a preacher, and so want to improve and grow. And so this was something I've seen a few other people do that I saw that was helpful. Honestly, though, Ryan, like for me, it's about trying to encourage the percentage of people that will listen more if they know there's an opportunity to ask a question. I really want to encourage interaction with the text, interaction with the sermon. And so we're trying to create a culture where people are not just listening and kind of just like tuning it out. I really want critical thinking and deliberate kind of engagement with the passage. I mean, sometimes the questions come in, they can sound harsh.
Yeah.
Sometimes when people are like, "What in the world are you talking about?" Or
Right.
whatever, because it is anonymous. But I actually like that. I like some high heat. I like some that makes no sense to me, or that point didn't really that wasn't clear to me. Because another reason why I like doing this, and I've told you this before, is there's always moments as a preacher like, man, I really didn't do a good job on explaining that.
Right.
And I kind of get a little bit of a do-over at the end. I'm like,
Right.
okay, no, I wasn't trying to say this. I was trying to say this. And so sometimes preachers do that in their closing prayer where they pray their sermon again. And
And also, Lord, we just ask.
yeah, exactly. I just don't pray longer. I just have a moment at the end before the end of the service where I can do that. So, yeah, those are, I really just want to encourage interaction, and it gives me an opportunity to clarify things. That's huge.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
Leading up to this, and we kind of had decided we were going to do this and trying to work out the way it was all going to work. I really enjoyed the few weeks leading into that where we would meet to kind of review services and look at some of what's coming next, where you'd say, man, if I had 5 more minutes, I would have said this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's been cool to see how that's giving you an opportunity to see that. But the other, just something that's just true about preaching is it's not meant to just leave people only with a conclusion. It's meant to be a catalyst to drive people to action, and often drives people to questions. And so it gives that outlet where you don't end up just with, not that you don't almost every week end up with a queue of people to ask you questions after the
Right.
service, which is welcome.
Well, but not everybody, to your point, not everybody's comfortable doing that either.
Right. And that's certainly
Walking,
not anonymous.
no,
Yeah.
walking straight up to me like, dude, you totally blew it. That didn't make any sense. But somebody may message that in. And so we just decided we'd rather have maybe a little barbed question now and again, or somebody that was a little look like they were a little bothered by something, rather than not creating a space for that. And so, yeah, I absolutely am thankful for it, and looking forward to pulling into the mailbag or
Yeah,
the QR
that's
code
good.
bag
That's
and
good.
talk through some of these questions. So,
I think it's also helpful just to remember that catechesis has been important in all of the church's history. A question and answer of like,
yeah,
is this how this works?
right.
Tell me the answer to this specific question, and to hear those things put into a concise answer, which I think you do a great job
Yeah.
of
Well,
very consistently. And so
yeah, I try.
we're grateful. I'm
Yeah,
grateful for
yeah.
sure. So okay, handful of questions. Are
Hmm.
you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do
Okay.
this.
So these are dating back to November, December of this last year,
Right.
all the way up through the present. And so, if you've been listening to sermons at Christ Fellowship for and been present with us over the last few months, you'll probably recognize what sermons these are from.
Sure. Yeah. Some of them
So
will connect. Some
yeah,
of them won't, but some of them
yeah, you
will.
may. I have no idea. I don't remember that at all. So, okay, what does fasting practically look like for a Christian today? And how do I know if I'm doing it for the right reasons instead of legalism? Great
Fast.
question.
Yeah. Fasting it's a great question. Fasting is deliberately abstaining from food for the purpose of prayer and purification. Like, I am deliberately pulling back from eating for some defined period of time for a purpose to pray and to kind of set myself aside and apart for focus on the
Yeah.
Lord, to be purified and consecrated before Him. I do think it's important before we jump into the definition a little bit more, just to say fasting is meant to be a normal part of the Christian life. I don't think fasting is a optional discipline. I actually think it should be a normal discipline for people. I would also say that I don't necessarily think that it's wrong to say I'm fasting from social media or I'm fasting. There can be benefit from that. But when we talk about biblical fasting, we're talking about food. And so it's when I use the word deliberate, well, here's what I mean. It's not just an accidental kind of backing into this. I'm not just doing this for the health benefits, although studies are showing like there's a lot of benefits to fasting in general, just to your
Right.
own physical body. It's a focused, structured time. I find usually revolving around one of two things. Usually, people are deliberately fasting to deal with a sin struggle in their life. I find a lot of benefit, Ryan, when I have walked through some particular sinful strongholds in my life, of starting a season of going to war with those things with fasting, where I'm like, hey, for 40 days, one 24-hour period a week for this 40-day window, I'm fasting, and I'm fasting specifically because I'm wanting to weaken this sinful kind of pattern or thinking or addiction in my life. I want to weaken its stronghold in my life, that power in my life. And two, the second reason, not just a sin struggle, but secondly, a decision. Oftentimes people will fast because it's like, man, I got this big decision I'm making, or maybe it's a career change, or where I'm going to go to college, or it's a dating relationship or something.
Right.
And I'm needing wisdom and I'm wanting to make sure that I'm not thinking about this the wrong way. I think fasting is an incredibly helpful way
Good.
to do that.
Good. You separate food and other things specifically because food is an actual need,
Right.
something different. And then let me ask you, uh, when you say normal,
Mhm.
so you've kind of alluded a little bit to um, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's for a season.
Mhm.
Can you flesh that out a little bit
What should
more?
normal
What's
be?
when you say this is a normal part of Christian life?
Yeah.
What would that look like? And how does it look whenever your seasons change? Like, what does it look like for a high school student, or what does it
Right.
look like for a mom, and what does it look like for
Mm.
you know,
I think what I wouldn't say is I don't think you necessarily have to fast from food 24 hours once a week all your life.
yeah,
I'm not saying, one day a week there should be no food. And it's this kind of, I think that's the spirit of the question. How do I know if I'm doing it for the right reasons instead
yeah,
of legalism? Is I definitely think it can drift into legalism. I think what it normally looks like is when you look at a year. So you got 365 days, 12 months in a year. I do think having a couple of 40-day windows in a year where you are doing more deliberate fasting could be kind of a normal pattern to embrace. Um, when you do that, how you do that, what that looks like, I think is going to vary. Historically, the church has found benefit around things like Easter and Advent, Christmas, people fasting to some degree. You've heard about people having Lent where they're giving up something for Lent, things like that. We want to be careful that we're not too prescriptive and too tight about that. I have just found every year of my life, there's always at least one kind of sin thing God's bringing to mind that maybe I just want to go to war with. And there's at least one kind of major decision every year I'm kind of working through, at least one. And so to me, those two fronts, keeping those two things before you can help you have a sense of like, hey, this is a good time. And especially for like families, we've done an episode on schooling. If you're coming up to a major decision, like what should we do for schooling for our kids? That's a great season of fasting because just talk about this a bit more, okay? We're not doing an episode on fasting, but let me just say this. Why is fasting so important and why is it so impactful? Because when you deprive yourself of food for a 24-hour period or 12-hour period or whatever that looks like, you're feeling things physically that remind you of spiritual realities. So
Mm,
every time I feel a hunger pain, I'm reminded that as much as I need food, I need God more.
that's good.
So when I feel hungry, I'm like, God, I feel this hunger pain. I really would like to eat something right now. But I know as strong as this feels to me, I actually need you more. So there's this reality of like, it creates this spiritual hunger based on a physical hunger. And there are times like, man, I'm just not really, somebody might say, I'm in a dry season. And I just don't really feel close to God. That's also like a really good opportunity to fast because what fasting will do, it will kind of orient you around like, this is what I really need. But here's the other thing it does practically, from the time you would spend eating, you take that time and you redeem that time to pray. So for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, if you're free to not have to go sit down and eat or put a meal together or whatever, you're freeing up time in your schedule, just the regular humdrum of your life, to spend time praying before the Lord. And so I I would be very slow to give a really sharp prescription. I like the 40-day window. I like a 24-hour period once a week in a 40-day window. I've also had seasons where, for a week, I'm trying to eat in an 8-hour window and fast for a I'm not a math major, what's the rest of the 16-hour window? Um, and so I've had windows like that. I think the key is being sensitive to what God's doing in your life from a conviction, sin, decision kind of standpoint and respond to that well.
One more question. I know it's not.
Yeah,
It's not.
it's all about fasting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is it so neglected? Why is it so? Why is this such a neglected thing? And is it just because it's hard for? Is it hard to preach? Is it hard to communicate? As is it hard to tell people, hey, this should be part of your normal life? Or why do we not talk about it a ton? In fact, you talk about it a lot more than most pastors, even
Probably
in our
not
sphere,
enough.
do.
Probably not enough. But I do think that no, it's a good point for me just to go, when you think about your application grid of things you're talking about preaching, fasting probably should be more something we talk about in the preaching event, preaching moment. But we're just living in an incredibly consumeristic culture, Ryan, where comfort is our idol. And we assume comfort. We expect comfort. We expect speed. We expect efficiency. When I go to a restaurant and I order food and a table next to me gets their food before I do, it's like, what is going on back there? Everything's right.
We got here first.
Yeah, we got here first. Like, what is going on? And and I think that in that kind of like framework, denying yourself and with abstaining from that can feel very bizarre. And so I think that's part of the reason why it's tough.
That's good. Okay, this question comes in uh consistently.
Yep.
Um,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Lord's Supper.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Lord's
Yeah. Yeah.
Supper. What is the biblical support that the Lord's Supper is primarily meant to be a recommitment? That's a word that you
I use it
use.
a
It's
lot.
a
I sure do.
vocabulary
Yeah.
we talk about when we observe the table together.
Hmm.
So the Bible says it's done in remembrance. Uh, this question says, "I promise I'm not saying that recommitment is a bad thing. I just want to know."
Why do you keep
Yeah,
harping on that,
yeah.
Spencer? Why is that so important?
And let
Yeah,
me
it's a
say
fair
this.
question. And, I strive for precision with what I say. And the question does say that I have said it's primarily meant to be a recommitment. And that's a fair critique. Like, I don't, I would just want to say, I don't, I don't think it's primarily recommitment. I do think remembrance is probably a better primary word because that's the biblical word.
Yeah.
But I would say, and I'll explain why, I don't think you can get away from recommitment being a core part of it. And so, if in my language I've allowed recommitment to overshadow remembrance, that's probably a course correction I need to make. Having said that, let me make a case for recommitment as a critical part. And by the way, and under part of the reason sometimes it's coming out so strong in my language is because I think it's it's not clearly understood in a lot of people's mind that that's a part of what we're doing.
Right.
I think a lot of people understand the remembrance part. If I'm overemphasizing the recommitment, it's probably because I see that as a deficiency in many people's thinking about
Sure.
it. 1 Corinthians 11, 27 through 29 says, "So then whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sin against the body and blood of the Lord. Let a person examine himself. In this way, let him eat the bread and drink from the cup. For whoever drinks and eats without recognizing the body eats and drinks judgment on himself." So, where am I getting this idea of recommitment? It's this passage. It's 1 Corinthians 11, where Paul, after talking about what the supper is, gives instructions to the Corinthian church about how they are to take it. And yes, what you're doing in the supper is you're remembering what Jesus Christ has done for you. And historically, the church has understood this as a Thanksgiving feast, right? Where in remembering,
Yeah.
when I remember what Jesus has done, it wells up within me gratitude. It wells up within me a sense of thankfulness for what Christ has done as I think about and reflect on his sacrifice for me. But when I remember, I'm not just recollecting what happened. There is a sense in which I'm not just watching Jesus, I am celebrating it. I'm affirming my trust in it again.
Right.
And so, what we want to say is what we want to see happen in the supper is this opportunity for your faith to be strengthened, for Christ to become more real to you as you take the meal. No, we do not believe that the elements transform into the body and blood of Jesus.
Right.
We do not believe that the elements have the presence of Jesus in some kind of special way, like a Lutheran position, which is consubstantiation. We believe that in the same way that there's something special about the preaching of God's word, Jesus is working and that the Spirit's moving, that there's something special happening in the supper.
That's right.
I would not want to make too sharp a distinction between these two things. In other words, one of the questions you have to ask is on the supper, is there a difference between what happens in the supper than what's happening in the preaching of the word? I don't think so. I think there is this demonstration that's different in terms of it's physical, it's tactile, but there's a proclamation of Jesus being made at the table and in the preaching of the word that people are meant to respond to. We probably could do a whole talk just about the Lord's Supper and
Yeah.
ecclesiology and put a pin in that and talk about that more. But just for now, let me just say Paul's encouragement in 1 Corinthians 11 to slow down and examine yourself, that's concretely where I'm saying I think recommitment's a part of that.
Yeah. That's good.
Now, specifically, he says, what does it mean to not take in an unworthy manner? He says, whoever drinks and eats without recognizing the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. So, what does that mean? I think he's talking about the body of Christ. And I think what he's talking about is examining your role in the unity and health of the church that you're a part of. So, part of what we do when we take it together is I'll typically invite people to recommit themselves to three things. I'll invite them to recommit themselves to Christ. There's just a time of like personal inventory, repentance,
Yeah.
especially after we've heard the word preached. We typically take it after the preaching of the word. It's like, what is God convicting you of today after you're hearing this word preached? Number two, I ask people to recommit themselves to their local church. That is 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 29. If you eat without recognizing the body, you eat and drink judgment on yourself.
That's good.
And thirdly, I like encouraging people to recommit themselves to the mission of Jesus, where I'm recommitting myself to make disciples and to making Christ known.
Yeah. I think what I hear when I hear pushback on that word recommitment is probably something in the vein of faith works. Like, are you trying to add something to this? This feels very worksy
Yeah, sure.
from some people. But I just think it's helpful to remember that remembering is not a passive act.
No.
Remembering is not just a recalling of a biblical event in a moment in time. You are actively reorienting yourself to who God is and who you are in light of him. And that reorientation is recommitment. It just, me may not like the word, but
Yeah,
It is
and
exactly what's happening.
it's a fair point to say remembrance is the word Jesus uses when he says,
Sure.
"Do this in remembrance of me." It's just, especially in 1 Corinthians 11, when you see Paul take that idea and unpack it, it does seem to take on more of a, I'm not just passively kind of remembering this like I'm watching a movie in the past. I'm actively trusting, believing, relying on what Jesus has done for me in that moment. And the
That's good.
supper is encouraging me to do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Next question. You ready?
Let's go. Let's do it.
Old Testament. This one good?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Was Old Testament sacrifice tied to their salvation? So this is especially helpful when we look at texts and have looked at texts and are and will look at texts of the way this kind of works together, the way it's referenced in the New Testament.
Hmm.
Was Old Testament sacrifice tied to their salvation of
Okay.
OT people?
Mhm.
And if not, like, or if so, was their salvation works based?
The simple answer is no.
Okay.
I do not believe that Old Testament saints were saved by their works,
Okay.
and I do not believe that the sacrificial system saved them. There's some room for nuance here, though, and so let me just throw a few verses out here. First of all, Genesis 15:6. Abram believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. What you see, I think, happening in the Old Testament is a faith in the coming promise of Jesus is what saved them. Today, our faith in the finished work of Jesus is what saves us. So if you were to draw like a diagram, it's like a timeline, and the cross is in the middle. Old Testament saints are looking forward, believing. New Testament saints are looking back. The sacrificial system was designed to keep them looking forward. So they sacrificed those animals for their sin, not because the blood of bulls and goats saves them, as Hebrews 10:4 says they didn't. Hebrews 10 says, no, the blood of bulls and goats did not save them. What did it do? Why was it required? It was a part of the worship that God instituted to keep them looking forward. Because here's the deal, you were never done. No sooner did you offer that sacrifice, you're having to offer another one.
Gathered the next lot. Yeah.
Every year, there's a Day of Atonement. There's this moment where every year you're coming together as a people and saying we need God's forgiveness. And so I do think what God was encouraging is a faith-filled obedience, Ryan, is the phrase I would use. There's a faith-filled obedience to what they did, where they were obeying God, but trusting that he was the one who ultimately was forgiving them. And the fact that they continually had to do it pointed them to an ultimate sacrifice that would once for all deal with it. We stand in light of that as New Testament people looking back and looking forward to Jesus' return, but we trust that his finished work means that no more sacrifice for sin is needed. It's complete, sufficient, and final.
God has only ever saved people one way, by grace through faith. You're saying the sacrifices didn't change that. They actually just pointed to it. So every lamb, every goat, every bull that was slain in the Old Testament was saying something has to die for the sins of
Your sin is serious.
people.
Yeah, your
Yes.
sin is serious.
And Jesus was the answer to that whole system and what it was asking for.
Let me say one more thing about
Yeah.
this. Yes, couldn't have said it better myself. I think the one thing I would say is remember when you read your Bible, that one of the things you're doing is you are reading um, a book in which there's one author, God, who worked through multiple different biblical authors. There's one message, one point. But you do have this element and idea of development of clarity about who Jesus is and what the gospel is as you go from Old Testament to New Testament. So one of the reasons you and I believe this is because we're reading the Old Testament in light of the New Testament. We are saying, when Paul says in Romans 3:20, listen to this. He says, "For no one will be justified in his sight by works of the law, because the knowledge of sin comes through the law." When Paul says no one can be justified by works of the law in Romans chapter 3, what we're doing is we're looking back and we're understanding the Old Testament sacrificial system, what was required for them. It was required because it was pointing them to their need for God. It wasn't required in the sense that it was saving them. And so we unapologetically believe that as we walk from Old to New Testament, there's a clarity. Just for example, about who Jesus is. We know he's a son of Abraham. We know he's a son of David.
Yeah.
But there is this larger clarity that the New Testament provides as we look back to the Old Testament. It's important.
Okay. All right, next question. You ready?
Do it.
Okay, all the way back to the first sermon of the year. Uh, question came in. Now, here's the deal, Spencer.
Oh gosh, you're
Sometimes,
gonna do this one?
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, okay,
You
okay,
ready?
okay.
You ready?
Let's do this. Okay.
Sometimes questions come in, and I don't know if people are serious, if it's a
We
joke.
do have some people who I know for a fact ask questions just to like mess with
Oh,
us.
absolutely.
This may be one of them, but we're gonna swing at it anyway.
That's right. And so, but I thought, I want people to know, like, we look at the questions, we take
Yeah,
them
sure, sure,
seriously
sure, sure.
too. But also, I thought there was something helpful in the middle of this. So, a moment happened, first sermon of the year, where you started to say a verse and the numbers came together 6, 7.
Indeed.
And you kind of looked up like, oh man,
Oh
people are going to
no.
respond.
Oh
And
no.
there's already people in the audience, responding. And it's like you made, you made an acknowledgement of a
It was a little
reality in
joke.
the
Yeah,
room.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
6, 7. Yeah.
And so someone responded with the question: did you know that 6, 7 is demonic? How can you, as a pastor, allow that here? We should look into the things that we consume in our lives. Totally valid question. Maybe,
Sure.
maybe questionable way to go about it. But I think it's helpful. Like it,
Yeah.
it opens up this for me. Um, when I acknowledge the question, know that it could be
It could be
serious,
somebody joking around. It could be
right?
somebody serious. Yeah.
Sure. But understanding, like, there's a reality that people have certain particular views about the things you can or can't say when it comes to something cultural. Now, all you were doing was acknowledging something that people's minds go to all the time. I'm learning as a student pastor when I'm saying things not to say 6 or 7 things. I'm like 6 or 8 things,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. 4 or 5 things.
and even then people are like, oh, I almost said it.
Yeah, yeah,
You just stumble into saying something where people are going to respond a certain way. But there is an expectation from some people that you do address certain cultural things.
yeah. Mhm.
And there's also an expectation from people that say you shouldn't address, just preach the text. Nothing else should come out. How do you navigate that as a pastor? And what's helpful for us as congregants to understand about where you sit
Yeah.
on preaching in, week out, while there's all the things happening in the news and all these things happening in
Yeah.
culture? How do you know what to engage in, not to engage in,
What do
what to
you choose to
acknowledge?
swing at and
Sure.
and let go by? Yeah, for me, it's very simply our statement of faith and my burden to guide our church family. So I was having a conversation with somebody the other day that was like, "Man, I'm so thankful that you've talked about political things and you've gotten involved in this topic or that topic. And I want you to know that there are times when I worry that people think that I'm just like really itching to talk about this stuff. I'm really not, Ryan. I'm really not. I really am more reluctant. My filter for what I choose to talk about and not talk about really starts with our statement of faith. Are things happening politically that intersect with sincerely held beliefs and convictions that we have as a church? That's the first question. And increasingly, as you know, that's happening. I don't think we've got more political. I think politics have got more theological. And I think that's the burden there. But here's the second thing. I want to make sure that I'm not relegating the guidance our church family needs just to their phones or the news cycle. And so, on the topic of immigration, on the topic of the nation of Israel, on the topic of how to vote, these kind of flashpoints, I have wanted to address them because I think people need guidance about how to think about this, how to process through it. And if I say nothing, I did feel like I'm just kind of handing that over to our culture mode. So it's a statement of faith and it's a burden as a pastor to guide the congregation.
I just also want to say too, if you're sitting there wondering, like, why are you talking about this? Like, another thing that you just may want to know with these QR code questions, we actually get a lot of questions that have nothing to do with the sermon,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
there are
Oh yeah.
lots of these things. How do I engage this? And we get questions about things with politics and things with, family, and every week, even if it has nothing to do with the sermon, people are asking questions, and so it's just not out of thin air for
No.
sure. So
And just to hit the nail on the head about this 6, 7 thing, man, as far as I know, I have not been shown anything that was demonic.
sure.
And I just want people to know just you know this, but just because something's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. And part of what we've got to be in this cultural moment is back to that phrase, sober minded, discerning. And just because I see something cultural that somebody says is demonic, I need to really evaluate that and really test that against the word of God. And I have seen nothing to tell me that. I certainly would never want to say something or point to something that would be hurtful or harmful to our folks,
That's good.
and would want to be as humble as I can about receiving that. I have not seen anything about 6 7 that tells me that it is.
That's good. Okay. You talked more recently about the way God guides us through trials,
Mhm.
often instead of around them.
Yep.
So here's a question that's come in a number of ways. Do you believe all trials occur because we have a lesson that we have to learn? And until we learn or pass the lesson, the trial won't end?
Yeah. Um, to me, the answer to this question about trials and lessons we need to learn is we got to zoom out. We got to go back to what is God's goal with us in our salvation. So when we come to Christ, in a moment, we're declared righteous. The exchange happens. Christ gives me his righteousness. My sin in the cross is paid for. And that moment of justification is a moment. It's a declaration. It's a moment in which it happens when I'm adopted as a son and daughter of the King. It kicks off a process of sanctification where Christ, by the Spirit, to the glory of the Father, is conforming me to Jesus. God's goal for you and for me in our salvation is that we would look more like Christ in our thinking, in our believing, in our acting, in our words, that our lives would be conformed to Jesus, that he would chip away at everything that's not Christ. And so, yes, one of the things that God uses to change us is circumstances.
Mm.
There are three, right? Three things God uses by his spirit to change us: his word, his people, and circumstances. Those are the things that God uses to change us. And so I have found that circumstances are probably the most powerful. I don't think, to this person's question, that God just perpetually keeps a trial going until we learn a lesson. I think, to quote another pastor, at any given moment, I'm aware of like three or four things God's doing, and he's doing like a million. And so, what I do find is that sinful patterns and habits in my life continually are challenges I bump up against until I humbly deal with them. And I do think trials can be used by God to help us with that. But I don't think there's some kind of like, I gotta pass the test and learn what I'm supposed to learn for this thing to end.
Mm.
There's a greater picture, a greater thing that God's doing in any given moment, and I think our sanctification is a lifelong process. If a trial only ended till I learned everything I was supposed to learn, I probably would never be out of trials.
Stay in the trial.
I'd be in a really tough spot. However, I don't think it's wrong to say, God, in the midst of a trial, if there's something I'm missing here, show it to me. Humbly submitting to God's loving sanctification, his discipline, his correction in our lives is important. I don't think every trial happens because of bad choices we make. I think there are trials that oftentimes come just as a part of living in a fallen, broken world. I do think there are trials that come because of poor choices we make,
Sure.
and that God, in his redemptive grace, uses those for our good. And we do need to learn from those. And so, to the person that's like, I kind of keep finding myself in the same kind of problem where every relationship I have this problem with this person. It's like, at some point,
What's the common
you got to
denominator?
look in the mirror, like, and
Yeah.
realize I keep finding myself in trials, and you meet people like that just don't see that. And so, yeah, I have found in life, when you're a believer, you got to remember that God's way more committed to you looking like Jesus than you are, and He's going to do whatever it takes. Whether it's Philippians 1:6, right? He who started a work will complete it in you, or Hebrews 12:6, God disciplines those He loves. Like, there's all these promises and truth that tell us, when I walk through a trial, I can know, Ryan, with 100% certainty that God is working and that there is something He's wanting to do in my life. Whether I have to find this like magic answer for it to end, I don't think I would want to see it that way.
How do you have a difficult conversation with someone that you have a problem with, but they are unaware that you are frustrated and upset? It's kind of two that come together,
Yep.
too.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
this is from sermon in
It was an
two
Acts.
two sermons, yeah,
Yeah.
in Acts,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, at the end of April. In unresolved conflict, how do you know when to let it go versus confront a person?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it's just important to say that I think conflict and difficult conversations should not be the norm in your life. And so I just want to say, like, if you find yourself in this spot where you're like, man, I'm just having one conflict after another with everybody, it's kind of about what we were saying a minute ago. There may be like a place of like, there needs to be some humility and some recognition on your part that maybe there's a pattern you have, or there's an oversensitivity to this. I do like the threefold kind of points I tried to put in the message that I just would want to unpack a little bit more here.
Yeah.
The way to deal with difficult conversations and conflict, especially with people that don't know that they've hurt you, is to start with confession to the Lord. Your humble confession of your own sin, how you've contributed to this, has got to be the place you start. If all you're doing is like, they did this to me and they did that to me and they wronged me, and like, you're gonna find yourself with spiritual blinders on, and you're gonna take a 3 level problem and turn it to a category 6 hurricane or 5, whatever the top number is. Confession to the Lord is where you got to start. Let me say this. It's very possible that you've not done a lot, and maybe somebody just has grievously wronged you. The goal of confession to the Lord is not just confessing your sin, it's confessing your need for God. God, I am hurt by what this person did to me. Would you comfort me? Would you be real to me? Would you close to me? We did a whole podcast on grieving, I think. And so I just think that place is where you've got to start, because you've got to let the Lord comfort you in your sin and the hurt that you feel. And you've got to let Him remind you of your desperate need for Him. Second thing, once you've confessed that to the Lord, you need to seek out godly counsel from others. So these alliterate: confession first, counsel with others second. You must be ready, Ryan, to be told that you are loony bin crazy nuts. And you can know that this is working if you're willing to say, hey, you know what? So and so thing happened. This person did this to me. But if you tell me I'm crazy and that I don't know what I'm talking about, I just want you to know I'm here for that. I'm ready to listen to that. You need to be with others specific and humble. So what I mean by specific is, if you really want somebody to help you, you can't go to them and generalize what's happened and expect them to give you good advice. You need to be specific. They said these words to me, this thing happened, this thing went on, and here's what took place. I know there's a hesitance here, and it's right to be like, well, I don't want to gossip. And somebody who's listening to this kind of counsel will be like, well, I don't want to hear all this mess. Like, well, look, either you're going to help them or you're not, but don't ride the fence. And so what happens in a lot of this step is conflict escalates because people empathize when they should inquire more clearly about what's going on. Oh, that sounds really bad. I'm really sorry for you. When the reality is, if you asked a few probing questions, you might realize they need to get over it. And it's not a big a deal as they're making it. I also need just to understand at this point, it's very easy for someone who's coming to you for counsel. So I'm talking to those of you that are giving counsel. If you're the type of person, Ryan, people listening to this need to know, if you're the kind of person where it's like, I'm a person so many people come to for advice, it could be because you give terrible advice,
Wow.
because you don't stand up to people and you don't say to them, hey, I need a little more information. And let me tell you the truth about that.
This is the person that's going to tell me exactly what I want to hear and tell me I'm
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Gas me up.
I think that it's very possible that some of us just need to be honest with ourselves about that, and recognize that the way that I steward a person approaching me for advice is a really big deal. And it's a big deal not just for their lives, but if it's a part of a church family where there's an issue, it's a big deal for the unity of the church. And so I would rather somebody be like, you know what? If I don't want to hear the details, if I don't want to get in the middle of this, I really just think I'll pray for you, but you probably should talk to somebody else about this. The worst thing you can do is kind of this middle mushy ground of, hey, I want to empathize with you, I want to help you. Absolutely. That sounds so bad. I'm so sorry. But there's no real godly counsel being given. So this is where in my mind, either conflict de-escalates or escalates. And if it's like, how do I know when I should confront a person? You should know if you're ready to confront a person if you've honestly gone to somebody who you're willing to be told you're crazy, and that person has really probed and inquired in a way that has really brought things out.
Not just led to confirmation bias and yeah.
Third thing, once you do, go with a clear goal in the conversation. So have the conversation with a clear goal. Principle that I live by: the depth of my critique needs to shape the time, but I'm willing to give somebody to consider it. So if my critique is deep, the time needs to be long that I give somebody to consider it. If my critique is shallow, I can expect a quicker response. So if my critique is, um, hey man, when you said this to me the other day, it really hurt my feelings. Man, I'm sorry, I had no idea. Now, in the grand scheme of things, I hope that's the kind of thing somebody counseling me be like, yeah, you probably should let that go. Like
Yeah.
that's not a huge deal. But if I felt the need, like it hurt and it just cut deep, like you made a joke about somebody's parent or you said something that was inappropriate and it really bothered me that you didn't just say that, but that you would like I can expect a quicker turnaround response. If my critique is deeper, I could expect a longer period of time for that person to consider what I'm. So I do live by the consider this thing when I come to somebody. Hey, would you just consider this? That this thing happened, this thing took place and it hurt or whatever, however that looks. But I just think this is where church unity rises and falls, is in these kind of points.
Mm.
Either rises and falls on confession to the Lord and humility, good godly people that are helping us work through that, that are not just empathizing but really challenging us, and then conversation with a clear goal.
That's good.
Yep.
Okay, 2 questions. One, how do I not feel like you're adding a step when you add counsel? So when you're saying go to somebody as opposed to you look at like a Matthew 18, if you have an issue, go to that person. If someone would tell you, you're just adding a step, like is it's not really
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
necessary. And the other question too is, um, you kind of mentioned like, hey, this is not that big of a deal. You probably should know when to let it go. But that's one of the questions.
I know.
So you look at the question of like Matthew 18 says go, but then you have Proverbs that will say things like overlook an offense. How do you hold those two things in consideration, and assess the situation and decide?
Let me give you a hot take on Matthew 18.
Okay,
I really don't think that applies to most of these situations.
good.
Okay. I know people like Matthew 18, and it's important. If your brother sins against you, go and show him his sin in private. If he doesn't, bring two or three with you. If he doesn't, bring it before the church. If he still doesn't, you're supposed to excommunicate this person.
Right.
I think Matthew 18 is largely about church discipline. And I think sometimes people apply every situation to that. So let's just remember what Matthew 18 is clear mindedly. Let's remember what it's about. It's about unrepentant sin, and typically unrepentant grievous sin. Like I'm somebody's in something and they're doing it and they know they're doing it and it's just like they're not stopping.
Yeah. Not a subjective personal
This
conviction.
isn't a yeah. I took something the wrong way or they said something to me that hurt my feelings. It's like this is somebody who is consistently, grievously, in an unrepentant way sinning before the Lord. That is what Matthew 18 is about. Most of the time when somebody's these questions are about conflict and difficult conversations. So just the context was, I think, is it Acts 22 where Paul comes to Jerusalem? They're like, hey man, all these people think you're like hating on Moses and don't want to follow the law.
Right.
Would you do something for us to build the unity of the church? Would you do this purification rite, which you're not required to do, but would you do this to communicate your respect for Jewish custom and our heritage? And Paul's like, bet, I'll do that. And he goes. By the way, it blows up in his face. But he goes because he's saying this is not something that we need to divide over. I don't think the gospel's at stake. We need to move forward. So I do think that's an example actually where he doesn't go to those people and like be like, actually, you're wrong. I need to have a conversation with you. And what you're saying about me about Judaism is wrong. I actually do. You know what he does? He just says, I'm not going to, I'm not going to like go out of my way to be aggressive or contrarian about this. I'm going to humble myself and do something that's probably not my first choice,
Yeah.
but I'm going to do this because it's best for the unity of the body. Sometimes overlooking an offense, love covering a multitude of sins, that idea is how you work through this tension. Matthew 18 is about unrepentant, grievous sin. I think love covering a multitude of sins means I'm not going to take up an offense just the first time it pops up. I'm going to choose to love and forgive you because in the end, it's probably not that big a deal. I think the line that you've got to work through, it's so difficult to give a principle other than the second step I gave, which you're like, why are you adding? But it's because I think it's critical. You need other believers in your life telling you this is either a good idea or a bad idea. And you need to listen to those people and do what they tell you to do because we can get spiritual blinders. Now, again, that's assuming they're mature and they're not disempathizing, they're investigating, but we have spiritual blinders on, and man, we can get so amped up. Would you say gassed up? Gassed up because we're just in this kind of feedback cycle, especially if it's just in our heads.
Yeah.
And so I hope I don't want to create an extra step in the sense of that. I would go to Galatians 6 for some biblical support, where Paul says, bear one another's burdens. And I do think there's enough one anothering, call for love covering a multitude of sins that it should be our normal default. Let me finish with this. I think it should be our normal default to overlook, not to confront.
Mm.
And if your tendency, like I said, if you're just constantly confronting and you're just rebuking all the time, I'm not sure you're living out the spirit of the gospel in your relationships.
That's good. That's good. Let me end with this. The last question is just one I wanted to address. We get questions like this almost every week.
Oh, yeah.
Just real particular, like, can you pray for this family member?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And also, we'll get some that are super encouraging. Like, hey, I want you to know this is something that's happening in my life. Thank you for this. Like, send those in. I mean, it's great. It's
Let it
great
fly.
to hear
Yeah.
encouragement and things like that. When you send something in, like, hey, can you pray for this particular thing? Yes, we get those, and we do read them, and we do pray for those things. But I also want to make sure you know the QR code is a great tool for us. That there's something personal and heavy that you're carrying, there are better avenues than a anonymous form.
Yeah.
And so our prayer team, we have a response time at the end of every service. Our
That's right.
prayer team is there
Yep.
ready.
Yep.
If you're holding on to something, that's a great place to go. In humility and independence for people who are excited and ready and equipped to help you bear those burdens
Right.
and care for you. And so, yeah, come back and find us after the service, at the end of the service, and let a real person stand with you and care for you. We want that. We don't want the screen in front of us to be a substitute for something that God has intended to be so much more a community of other believers. So,
Good.
in light of that, keep the questions coming,
That's right.
and remember that we do see them. They are anonymous. They are
Mhm.
super important to us. This
Right.
is part of the reason why the podcast exists,
That's right.
to be able to answer questions that our people have. And so, until next time, y'all have a great time, and we'll see you next week.
See you later.